Continue our discussion on leadership. Remember, we say you are a leader because you lead. 3 requirements if you are really going to be a leader. You must know where we are going. So one of the critical requirements for leadership is ability to conceptualize, think through ideas, so that by the time you are bringing it to others, you yourself at least have some level of understanding. That's why we call you a leader, because you lead. But I think number 2 is not just enough, it's to have influence, that you must be somebody who people can trust. You know, even if you have clarity of where we are going, if I don't trust you, I'll certainly not follow you. So for you to be called a leader, I need to trust you enough to, when you tell me to come from my area of comfort to a new area that you had promised me will be better, how do I follow you? I have to trust you and believe in you. But I think thirdly and importantly, you must be involved. You can't tell me to go somewhere where yourself you are not going. So in leadership, there must be involvement by the leader. And we are learning all these things from Bible characters, people who led in the Bible. And we are trying to learn something out of them in character study. And today we choose to talk about the first king of Israel. He was called King Saul. Who is King Saul? His hometown, I think we need to know it. He is a Benjamite. And Benjamin, the land of Benjamin, was near the Dead Sea in Israel. It was right in the south. That's where he came from. His story is found in the book of 1 Samuel. In fact, from many chapters, from chapter 9 all the way to chapter 31 is there. But of course, he is also mentioned in the book of Acts, chapter 13, verse 21. Can we say something about his family tree? His father was called Kish. His wife was called Ahinoam. His sons were Jonathan, Ishbosheth. But he also had daughters called Merab and Paul's wife, Michal. That's the guy we are discussing today.
David's wife.
And I think that's a very, very important. David's wife is mentioned, yes, but it's very important to discuss him because he is the precursor of King David. And a lot of things that make David be great is simply because he was, because we compare David with Saul and get to see there are a few lessons, a few things that he missed. You know, even the marriage of David to the daughter of Saul, Michal, had a problem. It sounds like this Saul had brought their children to feel very proud and to think of themselves as a special breed, so that even the wife Michal was looking down on her spiritual husband. But anyway, you need to understand that this David we are talking about is the one who killed the giant Goliath. And once he killed Goliath, which would have pleased King Saul, the problem arose. The Jewish women were dancing in a victory parade. Do you know what they said? They sang, "Saul has slain his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." That's 1 Samuel 18:7. Remember, David is a small boy. But that really annoyed the king. Because the people made more of David's single victory than all of Saul's, the king went into a rage and became jealous of David. From that moment, and for the rest of Saul's life, he had never had peace. That's how jealousy can do you harm. Instead of building up Israel, King Saul wasted all his time, hunting for this boy called David. As David was in, I think, in his mid-teens and is growing. But he moved from hill to hill, not fighting enemies, but trying to kill David. This young man, David, however, respected God's anointed king, so never fought back. He kept running away. He had several opportunities, David had several opportunities to kill Saul, but he never killed Saul. He said he cannot touch the Lord's anointed. As a leader, please learn very early that jealousy will misguide your direction. It will totally destroy your leadership. It will make you think that a teammate is an enemy. You know, can you imagine? This is somebody helping you to win your battles and has not even said or done anything. But just because outsiders are thinking positive of him, instead of using this strength he has, you waste it. You know, even the battle where Saul died, if only David was on his side, maybe things would have turned differently. Now, it's very, very important to understand. But unfortunately, jealousy is not a Saul's only flaw, but neither is it our flaw, our only flaw. But I think whenever you study the life of King Saul, please think about jealousy. Ask yourself, are there people in your team whom you are not allowing to carry their weight because you don't want them to get glory? Ever heard of the saying? They made great strides who never cared who got the credit. They made great strides who never cared who got the credit. And I think it will be very, very important to understand that your leadership will be shortchanged. It will never realize what God intended it to realize, as long as you are suffering from insecurity because some people in the team are more gifted than you. Even if they are more gifted in certain areas, they are not the leader. You are still the leader. And the work of a leader is not to be an expert in everything. The work of a leader is to coordinate the experts together. And I think that's what Saul missed. So whenever you study the life of Saul, we studied the impact of being jealous. You know, there's a huge battle the Philistines are involved in. And by that time, Samuel has actually died. In one of those battles, Samuel has died. And remember, Samuel is the one who anointed Saul, and is also the one who anointed the small boy David. And at this point, King Saul is desperate because of this war. So what does he do? He breaks God's command by going to consult a medium. Who is a medium? A spiritist. Somebody who claims to go to the spirit world and can get things from the spirit world. In fact, he is claiming that she can raise Samuel's spirit from the dead so that King Saul can consult him. This is occultic activity. And God had already said so. Go back to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 18, verse 9 to verse 12. God said occultism must never be dealt with. If you want to God, you go to God direct. You are not allowed to go through the spirits. You are not supposed to go through diviners. You are not supposed to talk to the dead people. Ancestral worship, just go to number 18. It's not allowed. Whether the person who died is like someone who is a good guy or is another bad guy, he simply talking to the dead or the spirits of the dead is a no-go zone at all. For those in Africa, this is a very serious matter because our tradition kind of forces us to have a special place for the dead. But the Bible, if you believe in Jehovah, Jehovah says that's a no-go zone. And Saul knew about it. But he still went to a diviner. This kind of occultic activity angered Jehovah because it relied on satanic forces instead of going to God. And Saul could have gone to God. You know, whatever appeared, because the lady claimed to have brought up Samuel, may even have been a demon pretending to be disguised as Samuel. But the important thing is, whether real or false, it's a no-go zone. And although it is predicted correctly, you need to understand the devil can do that he would die, it doesn't make it true. You know, you need to understand no amount of desperation as a leader should ever send you to the occult. To see a witch doctor, to see a diviner, to go to see a prophet as a leader, that's a no-go zone. Because the moment you go to the occult, Jehovah says he no longer will back you up. Have you heard of people, even some who are pastors, and they go to the occult to help create crowds so that more people can come to attend church? One leader called Saul died because of doing that, among as many things he did wrong. I think it's important for us to learn from King Saul that the occultic powers are real, they are there. We are not denying the power of the occult. We are only saying they are the wrong one. They come from the devil, and the devil is an enemy of God. First problem. Number two, they have certain amount of power, much more than a human being can have, but they don't have the power of God. So why not go to God himself, who is the creator of the devil? We had a pastor called Pastor Dennis White, who used to say, the devil is God's devil. He created him. That tells you there's no fight between the devil and God, because God is a creator of the devil. So the devil can never fight God. But for the time being, he has been given freedom on earth. For those of us who choose to worship him, he will give you some power. He has more power than a human being. But real power is with God. In the book of first letter of John, we are told, he that is in us, if you're a Christian, is greater than he that is in the world. So you as a leader must go to where power is. Don't go to the occult. That's the lesson we learn. You know, in the battle that he was afraid of, King Saul and the army of Israel were actually overrun by the Philistines. Now he is about to be killed. What does he do? He commits suicide. His sons were also killed by the enemy. Two things we learn from this story. First of all, remember, suicide is evil. Because suicide is murder, and a very straight type of murder is murdering yourself. Now, so it just adds to the evils of Saul. If only he had repented, instead of, then you'd have died to go to heaven. Now, you need to understand, although we don't have the time to deal with it, but we are studying Saul, that committing suicide means locking yourself away from the goodness of God. Because obviously, murder is condemned. So if you murder either somebody else or murder yourself, you have broken one of the 10 commandments. And therefore, you are saying you don't want God's help in this life and in the life to come. So that's one of the things you need to understand. Even if the worst came to the West, let God be in charge of your death. Do not take your own hands to kill yourself. Number two, related with this, our sin will affect our family. You know, basically, in this particular battle, his sons died with him. How unfortunate that can be. That you need to understand as a leader, that what you do out there will affect your family. And it can affect it in many ways. When you are a terror in your place of work, when you are a terror in your organization, when you are leading, somebody gets to know that your son is your son. What do you think happens? Your son gets molested because of who you are. Not even that. Because of the way you live your life. What do you think your son is watching? He is likely to repeat what you are living, so that you have messed up his future because of the kind of example you have actually given. But it needs to be very clear. If we are not good leaders, we don't live righteous lives, we affect even our own families. Ironically, David, the young man who Saul is jealous about, and whom Saul is running around for years, when this guy dies, King Saul dies, he mourns sincerely. He mourns to the extent, I've written a book called Leadership in David Style. And one of the lessons I drew about David is the fact that he never wished his enemies evil. He operated not at what we call the golden rule. Do to others what would you want them to do to you. He operated the platinum rule. What the platinum rule? Much more valuable than the golden rule. In other words, he never wished his enemies evil. He did good to his enemies. So when a man came and lied that he had killed Saul, he was killed. Because he said, you are a murderer, and the reward for a murderer is death. So the guy who lied that he had killed ended up being killed by the people, by the soldiers of David. It's very important to understand that the reason why you're a bad king or a bad leader is if you wish your enemy evil, and therefore you are always trying to do evil. But when you are like David, who seeks to do good, obviously you will get a bigger attraction of people. To wish your enemy evil will hold your mind, and you might not even start doing what God called you to do. But let's admit that King Saul did accomplish some things. You know, this Saul, remember, is actually chosen by God as the first king of Israel. So that's something that nobody had been king before. And he began very well, defeating the enemies of Israel and making Israel one united nations of all those tribes brought together. And he defeated many of the enemies of Israel. You will see during his reign, he was able to defeat the Ammonites. He defeated the Philistines. He defeated the Moabites. He defeated the Amalekites. Israel became a nation. David, of course, extended the boundaries, but the first person to put them were after many years of judges and all kinds of troubles from the neighboring tribes. They now were in control of their land. So we credit him with the ability to unite the scattered tribes, giving them one name and giving them strength. And you know, he didn't rule for a short time. He was a leader for 42 years. David ruled for 40. Saul ruled for 42 years. So he was a ruler for a long time. The only thing that went wrong is that instead of concentrating in leading his country, he spent quite a lot of time running after David. So David started well. Saul started well. And he led well until the small boy kills Goliath. Maybe one of the things as a leader you need to understand is that a good start is good. But a good start with a bad ending makes you be a forgotten leader. People want to forget you as quickly as possible, despite all the many good things that they did. That's one of the problems we have in Africa. Many people talk about Zimbabwe, talk about many countries you can talk about. The guys start, and they're the ones who are the liberators of the people. After 20 years of ruling, they are becoming old. And what happens? Things start going wrong. And when we remember those leaders, we remember them as dictators. We remember people who are ruling even when they had no biological, physical capacity. And it's soon forgotten the kind of good leaders they were at the beginning. Isn't that a good lesson to learn? That you need to be careful, that the fact that you started well is not enough. You must continue leading well until you exit the stage. Because it also means that succession planning, it also means that don't continue in office when it's not necessary, when somebody else can actually continue. David, in his part, actually appointed Solomon when he was still alive. I think it will be very, very important to understand this. A good start is good, but it's more important to continue to the end. Looking at the strengths of King Saul, I think we must admit that he was a courageous man. No wonder he won so many battles. I think we also know that he was generous and gave quite a lot to people. Early in his reign, he was also admired. He was also respected by the people. Like I've just been saying a little while ago, might this be what undid King Saul? Early success. He was not able to manage success. Might that be what brought him to where he was? That he had, everybody was singing his song, and so to think of somebody else being even mentioned became frightening to him. What about you? Is your success getting into your head? And in the process, you are going to spoil your own leadership. Whenever you remember King Saul, remember early success may have contributed to his ruin. So we have seen that his great weakness was insecurity, being insecure. In fact, in the process, he became impulsive. And once you're impulsive, very easy to go to the next step, which is to act unwisely. Because once you're impulsive, you don't think, you don't analyze, you make wrong judgment. And I think all this was caused by the jealousy of David. It's the one that drove him into madness, I think I could call it. And a great thirst for revenge. Not revenge for anything David did, just for David being better. He never asked himself, if God has created David better in this area, if I had a quarrel, should I not be having a quarrel with the God who created him, rather than with David? How many people have you punished in your leadership for them being good, for them doing things? You should never punish somebody for something they cannot be held accountable for. It's unfair. You cannot punish people for an act of God, like they call it in insurance circles. I think it will not be fair to punish somebody for an act of God. More than once, King Saul disobeyed God's instructions. Once he started the way down, he now was not only having a problem with David, he was not listening to God. What was his problem? He knows the man of God has said this. He knows God through the man of God has said this. But in this particular circumstance, I know better than God. That's pride. Or maybe call it self-confidence. And it ruined him. Are you reaching a level where you feel like you don't need to consult anybody? You know everything. You know better than anybody. I think that will be your undoing. And I think that will be something that you have to handle very clearly. Because if you don't handle it, I think it will cause you a lot of pride, a lot of trouble. In other words, you are proud. You can't consult. You know, some of the people you have to consult are younger than you. Some of the people you have to consult are not as gifted as you in certain areas. Some are ugly. And you simply don't want to have anything to do with them. What will happen? You will ruin yourself. That is something that will put you into trouble. And my prayer is that you manage your self-pride. The Bible tells us pride comes before a fall. So that's something that King Saul had a problem with. I think the other thing that we learn about this is that he forgot that he is answerable to God ultimately. That God is in charge of everything. Not Samuel. He could hide the sheep from Samuel. You know, he was told to kill all the sheep. he hid some, the good ones. And he could hide them from Samuel. But you can't hide them from God. And because you're a prophet of God, Samuel could be shown by God. I think that's something you need to understand. Please remember, act to the audience of one, God, who sees in secret. That will help your leadership. Once you start realizing that God is with you everywhere and anywhere, then there are no things you can start. You cannot start doing some funny things because nobody can see, because your followers cannot see, because your spouse cannot see. No, God is with you everywhere. As a leader, what will help you in life is to practice God's presence everywhere you go. You know, you can improve performance without competing or comparing. I think one of the things Saul did was to compare himself with David, a small boy. They were not even comparable. You need to avoid that idea of competing against others. When we compare ourselves with others, we become confused. We want what they have instead of using what God has equipped us with in our own specific mission. Because what David has is not to have, but yet God has made you a leader. We can stray from God and try to get what we want on our own. Life with God has direction and purpose. But life without God will become meaningless. So why don't you learn how to improve yourself over time by comparing your today with your yesterday and putting a target to be better tomorrow? That doesn't have to be better or worse than the other leaders. Don't compare yourself with other leaders. You know, the other thing we learned about him is that Saul was not totally disobedient. He was half obedient. Partial obedience means you can not enjoy earth and you will not enjoy heaven either. So this guy, Saul, was kind of trying to be obedient to God, but not fully. What happened? He could not do everything he wanted to do. Therefore, he could not enjoy his leadership as well as he should. But then he still was a guy destined for hell. Have obedience. Being a guy who is in charge, who will contribute in church, whatever, but you're having some secret sins, is not useful as a leader. Because what will happen is, you will not enjoy here because you are trying to, who is watching? Because you want people to see one side of you, but the other things you are doing secretly. So, and since God can see both, you have no hope in heaven, and you will not enjoy earth either. I think that's something that you need to tell yourself. So, can we come out very clear and say, success is not measured by output, but how you got the output. Saul did many things, but because some of his strategies and processes did not make God happy, he ends up with a problem. You know, he is being asked in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22, does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of adultery. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. Success is not to be measured by the output. God is both interested in the means and also, not just the means, also the end. And I think that will be something very important. May the Lord bless you as a leader, as you look at your process and your target.